welcome to a special Veterans Day edition of the Jack and Bill Show.
Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. You know, Bill, I went down to get the mail about 10 minutes ago and realized that half the people in the building are gone. Government employees are gone. The mail is not running today, so therefore there was no mail. And I'm wondering why we came in. So
I'm the only person that would need to.
also, you know, we had this thing. Wesley's the only one that needs to. That's right. Had this thing where
and
we had
FNG, the friendly new guy.
all these fears about interest rates going up and war in Israel and all this stuff, and then the stock market and the bond market decide to just take off. But we're not going to talk about that today.
No, we're not.
So,
Actually, I want to answer your question.
okay,
Why are we here? I'll say it in one word.
not for long.
One word. Commitment.
Yeah, that's good.
It's commitment. That's why we're here. And I think that's a good segue into what we want to accomplish with today's show, and that is to honor all of our veterans
And
and their
Bill,
commitment.
we happen to be ones that fit in that category. So, and I looked up the definition of a veteran, and there are two definitions. One is someone who's been doing a certain skill or a trade for a very long period of time. So, in other words, they're a veteran at it. But that's not what we're referring to.
No.
A true veteran is somebody who served in the armed forces.
Correct.
So,
So let's start with you. Tell the audience about your service. What
You
did
know,
you do for the country?
I think I could never. I wound up going to the Virginia Military Institute on a full track scholarship, and military science was a class that we had that you had to take. We took 18 credit hours a semester, and I remember starting off in Army ROTC, and then remembering started learning all these ground tactics and taking the point and potentially getting shot at and all that. And so I walked upstairs, true story, to the Air Force ROTC detachment because we had everything at VMI, Marines, Navy, Army, Air Force. And they're like, oh, you don't want to get shot at on the ground? And I said, no, sir, I don't. They said, well, we'll show you how to drop bombs from the sky or shoot people from the sky. So I'm like,
This is becoming very politically wrong.
I'm liking this. So, hey, in 1984, in the 1980s in the United States, at this academic institution, you had to pursue a commission. That's no longer the case, although we're very rapidly reaching a place where I think that there could very well be a draft in the future because there's not so much demand these days to serve in the armed forces. So anyway, I wound up being commissioned a second lieutenant at the Virginia Military Institute, and I have a really bad astigmatism, so I chose to become a navigator and go to navigation training in Sacramento, California, where Wesley's from. Excuse me. And I had, May, graduated in early May, and I didn't start nav school till October the 3rd. So I actually landed a job for a think tank in Northern Virginia called the MITRE Corporation, used to stand for MIT Research, and they only let MIT people in there. But ultimately, they let people like me in there. And I worked on something that helped my aviation career. We were working on an FAA project that was not classified for making, it was a cost-benefit study for changing the squawk system in an aircraft from a 4-digit to an 8-digit, squawk and ident type thing. And that was a very fun project before I left to go to Sacramento, October the 3rd, 1984. Did 2 years of navigation training and then decided that I wanted to further specialize in electronic warfare. And then with that, I finished in the top 10% of my nav school class. So I got the request that I wanted. And believe it or not, I thought that it would be wonderful to have a family and be in B-52 bombers here in Shreveport, Louisiana, home of 8th Air Force and the 2nd Bomb Wing, and the largest and most highly tasked bomb wing in the whole world by far. So that is where we live today. Might add, it's one of the most highly targeted places in terms of, I'm not supposed to talk about nukes, but I'm sure we're amongst the most highly targeted cities on the planet. So anyway, electronic warfare officer school too, just to, I learned some fascinating, interesting things. I'll back up for a second, Bill, and tell you, navigation training, we learned how to use radio aids, visual navigation, basically on a premise, just like there are fundamental premises in any endeavor, and this was in navigating anything, a boat, a plane, a car. Ground speed times time equals distance. So that's what you start with, and you adjust for winds.
And this was before satellite navigation.
This is correct. So if we flew across the pond, I was actually skilled in celestial navigation. We would poke a sextant through a hole in the top of the fuselage.
Wow.
And we could navigate by the using the sun by day and the stars at night, provided that there wasn't any cirrus obstructing our views. And if you couldn't do that, then it was ground speed times time equals distance adjusted for wind. Yes, sir.
While you guys were navigating by the stars, did any of you have frankincense, myrrh, or gold?
What a good question. Well, I think the celestial navigation was the least accurate form of navigation, because if you're flying a jet at 500 or 600 miles an hour and you're off by a degree, it doesn't take very long,
Nope.
even by a single degree of a 360 degree compass, to wander off and have Air Route Traffic Control Center ask you, excuse me, pardon the expression, Jambo 67, this is center, what in the hell are you doing? No, they wouldn't say that. But
They should.
but then we learned how we actually flew with night vision goggles, and I mean, these things were primitive back then. But so we did 3-hour low levels at nighttime, practicing to deliver high explosive ordnance into places by hiding behind terrain, and of the avoidance of anybody knowing that we were there. And so the aircraft that I was in, when we crashed a number of aircraft back then, when I was in, we had the same radar processor as the space shuttle. They've since greatly improved upon that. You could navigate off of our weapon systems now, which remember the cruise missiles that flew into Baghdad and go down a street at 500 miles an hour and make left and right turns and fly right to the target and blow it up. Those things had very sophisticated navigational systems that were better than what we could do, in the aircraft. So I think I only logged like 93 hours of navigation time in aircraft, and then went to electronic warfare officer training school. And there, Bill, I learned how to, I worked with intelligence, which you're familiar with, and our goal, I went through a school to learn every Soviet radar, how the radar sounded to your ear, and what frequencies they popped up at, and then how to counter them and communicate plans to the pilot and co-pilot to escape and evade this stuff. And you even had to recognize not just the target tracking radars, but like missile guidance. So you see missile guidance pop up on the screen, and you know that there's a telephone pole being directed at your aircraft. And if you don't do something in a hurry, you're just going to go down in a fireball, after an explosion. So that was
And
that.
how many years active duty?
I did 6
6 years active.
6 years active duty.
Any reserve duty?
Didn't do any reserve duty. That wasn't available to me in B-52s until I think about 5 years later. I was actually given the opportunity to have a battlefield promotion from captain to major, and like 3 years before my time. And I forget how long it takes to go from captain to major, but I think it was about, with the Pennsylvania Air National Guard, to be on what's called an electronic countermeasures C-130 cargo 130 aircraft, where they have a whole bunch of people on the back end. I would have been the mission control chief, and we did psychological warfare. Like you fly 12 miles from the coast of Russia and broadcast, George Bush shows up on everyone's TV set and speaks Russian to them.
Right.
So they had a mission like that, and my wife said, "You're not doing that. You're done with flying in the military. You served your time, and it's time to go do something else." But I will throw out that I was in from 84 to 90, and that was during the Cold War. The Cold War ended in 1989 under Ronald Reagan, when the Berlin Wall went
Correct.
down. Did you know this stuff, Wesley?
No,
No.
He wasn't born then.
So that was when
I wasn't even a twinkle.
you couldn't. East Germany and West Germany were separated by a
I didn't.
wall and machine guns, and anyone that tried to go in either direction, and many were shot and killed. There were, I think there were fewer than a handful of people that ever made it across. I'm not sure about that, but so we, during that time period until the Cold War ended with Russia, and I think all this began under JFK and Khrushchev and the Cuban Missile Crisis and Bay of Pigs and all that. I was actually born the day we surrendered the Bay of Pigs invasion. That's pretty cool.
Wow.
That was April the 28th of 1961, by the way. So we had this. We used to fly B-52s 365 24/7 with nukes on board. I'm not supposed to confirm or deny that, but that's not classified anymore, until they were doing a nighttime refueling operation over the coast of Spain and ran into each other and blew up, and
Oops.
and some the ordnance sunk to the bottom of the ocean. So there's probably some fish swimming around there with extra appendages and fins. Anyway, but so in 1989, well, after that, those were called Chrome Dome missions, and after that we did Nuclear Alert in a hardened bunker. And so I would do like 1 week on and 3 weeks off with a crew. Each crew had a truck. We would come on to we'd come on a Thursday and leave on a Thursday, and transition to the oncoming crew, when you left. And then we'd go do a top secret briefing of what our mission was, and then we would just hang out in this hardened bunker and watch TV and smoke cigars and, do what men do. And that was a very interesting thing, an interesting part of history. And that all came to a close with the end of the Cold War. And so I have a combat readiness medal. I don't know where it is. Stacy probably threw my medals away in the last move. Anyway, but for doing combat nuclear readiness, you know, during the Cold War.
You know,
And so-
thankfully, we never had to engage
Yeah,
in that.
we had to practice
We had to practice.
one time a week. There would be a klaxon sound, and you had to respond to the aircraft. And they had this thing, top secret. It's called two-man policy. You rip open the seal and get the message, and you know it would always say, we started engines first, and then decoded the message, and it would say, shut down engines and report to the command post or something. And then we top off the fuel on the aircraft because the aircraft were sitting out there ready to go. And what would make it a real one, you never know whether real or not. And of course the real never occurred. But that's why there's a huge base here that's centrally located, is because of the flight times of intercontinental ICBM missiles. We have the detection capability. You know, we would get a command post would get a notification from Omaha or Colorado or somewhere and say there's inbound nukes flying to Louisiana, scramble the bombers. And if you've ever seen Dr. Strangelove, and then you know, we would take off, and if we ever took off, we would know that everybody around here would have perished. And thank God, you know, that never came to pass.
You know, although our service was very different, the common element was that we both served during the Cold War.
Yeah.
We were both oriented towards the former Soviet Union. We were both engaged in electronic warfare. My path was different. I enlisted in the Army. I'd already started college. Was having a little too much fun in college. Lacked some direction and made the decision that I was going to enlist. And I enlisted for 4 years active duty as a linguist. So my path took me into military intelligence, U.S. Army. I went in and I knew I wanted to go military intelligence. They had a need for linguists. They administered a language aptitude test to me, and afterwards said, "Hey, congratulations, you did great. You get your choice. You could do Mandarin Chinese or Korean or Arabic or Russian," and they all sounded pretty bad. And I took the Russian. It seemed like the lesser of the language evils, and ended up, after basic training, going to language school in Monterey, California, studying Russian for 1 year, an immersion course, and then doing additional training. And all in all, did about 2 years of training to learn how to do my job. And my job was with a combat unit, the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, which was stationed along the former East-West German border. So this was prior to German reunification. We had a live mission. We were monitoring what the bad guys on the other side of the border were doing. So we had German linguists monitoring the East German military. We had Russian linguists monitoring the Soviet forces. It was a very exciting time. I actually arrived in Germany. You mentioned the Berlin Wall 1 week after the Berlin Wall fell. So everything was kind of up in the air. There was a lot of, the situation was very fluid, but the one constant was there still remained Soviet forces in East Germany even after the Berlin Wall fell. So it was just an exciting time. All in all, 4 years active duty, and then I did 6 years in the Army Reserves. And then after that, I decided, you know, I'd done my service. You know, enough was enough.
So you have 10 years of service
Yep.
doing that?
10 years of service.
Do you realize you could go work for the U.S. Postal Service for 10 more years and get a retirement out of that?
Well, it's never too late, right?
Because you're too old to go
Yeah,
back
I'm
into
too
the
old.
military.
just thinking about like, the question, well, tell us, something really interesting about your service, and you shared some things. I would have to say, there were a few things that were really noteworthy to me about my time in service. I'd say one was just being where I was at the time I was very, very interesting. And being in Fulda, which was a strategic location, this was geographically called the Fulda Gap. It was the place because of a valley. This is where if the Warsaw Pact countries were to invade Western Europe, they would have pushed through this geographical area because it was flat. That was an interesting time and place. Jack.
So, no, go ahead.
This was after the Berlin Wall fell, and U.S. service members were still prohibited from crossing over into East Germany for a period, and then they finally gave us permission, and this was so much fun for me. There was, I guess, 4 of us, and we piled into our lieutenant's car, and we made a beeline into East Germany. Now, we had a map that was very detailed for West Germany, but once you crossed over into East Germany, map details just didn't exist, and that was by design. So we're on what we think is just an Autobahn, a highway, traveling through East Germany, a car full of GIs.
Looking for the Fräuleins.
Well, looking for something, but what we found we were not expecting. All of a sudden, we're like in the middle of, like, here's an airfield, a military airfield. There's a gun range. I mean, we're surrounded by bad guys, and of course, it's not on the map. So we were a little freaked out, and so we kept driving through all of this. Ended up in a little German town, and we ended up being able to converse with a group of Soviet soldiers. Now, these are all conscripts, right? So they were forced into service. They're not volunteers.
And you communicated well with
right,
them since you were a Russian
we're
linguist.
communicating, and it was so much fun. These were just young kids. They didn't want to be there. They were homesick, and they were so curious, to be talking with us, and they wanted to talk about Western culture and Hollywood and all of that. That was so much fun. And then I'd say the other, notable thing about my time in service was being able to participate in Operation Desert Storm. So, albeit this was on the tail end, but they took our whole unit out of Germany, picked us up, and deposited us in the Middle East. So that was another interesting time in service.
Oh, really? So, and then you got out right after Desert Storm?
It was not right afterwards, but I got out of the service in spring of '92, so it was that next year.
Yeah. I think that's interesting. I missed Desert Storm by just a few months, but our unit was the unit that did all the bombing.
Oh, sure.
In Iraq, and the very first missions flown were augmented with extra pilots, and they were 31-hour flights from Shreveport, then low level, to avoid detection into Iraq and targeting SAM sites and things like that. Then they were coincidentally, using F-4 Wild Weasels back then. That's been retired, but they wait for the missile, target tracking and missile guidance radars to light them up, and then they shoot an anti-radiation missile right into where they are. Those people didn't have generally a long lifespan, but once we got air superiority, then we carpet bombed the Iraqi troops from high altitude, 35,000 feet, and it was our unit that destroyed everything on the road back to Basra. The last day of that bombing campaign.
I saw the evidence of that.
There were no survivors, But no, I'm just kind of curious, Bill. So did you ever have interest? Would you hear interesting things that would warrant going to go brief a colonel or a general or the major? Or, I mean, like you're hearing something coming from Soviets in the field that would, you know, raise the needle to where it was very timely and important to communicate things. I mean, was there ever anything like that, or
Well,
them moving stuff around or
oh
things
sure.
like?
I mean, the intelligence gathering that we were engaged in was primarily tactical, right? So we were there to support a tactical unit, the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, and so the intelligence, you know, was supporting the unit at a tactical level. But there were also times when you would hear things that were of more strategic importance, and so that information would go up to higher channels, you know, without getting into details. I mean, you never know what you might hear. But it was just really interesting work. All right, so I want to ask, how did you transition from being an officer in the Air Force, B-52 navigator, to getting into the investment business?
Well, I think it's kind of interesting. I had a father-in-law at the time. I was married to my first wife for 10 years before I found Stacy, and he interestingly, he was my connection to get into the Miter Corporation. He was a long timer there, and he had actually developed. He developed a missile called Talos, a guided missile used by the Navy, and he made the thing. And his brother worked on the Manhattan Project.
Wow.
So his name was Ensel Dodge. He's no longer with us. He went to the University of Auburn. And anyway, he did very well for himself over the years. He saved and he invested, and I was really kind of intrigued with all that, and he taught me a lot of things. And I thought, so I got an economics degree from the Virginia Military Institute, and I actually went there for 5 years. I could have graduated on time after 4 years, but I had run the standard to go to the Olympic trials in the metric mile, and I wanted to stick around for another year and train and see if I could get any better. So that was my dream, and so I took extra economics classes and things like that, and it was really a point in college where I really cared about the education and wanted to learn all that I could. And then once I got stationed here and settled in Shreveport, I actually went to Louisiana Tech nighttime. They gave classes at the base, and I got an MBA with emphasis in finance. And I had already been investing and so forth at the time. I was really kind of a do-it-yourselfer, and so I knew I was actually really kind of into it. And I had an additional duty as an officer in the squadron to, I think for 3 years, I was certified to prepare income tax returns for anyone who wanted, help from me. And I did income tax returns and was certified, to do so. So learned a lot of stuff with that. And then I was kind of, I had high hopes for doing some other things in, like investment banking and stuff, and that stuff fell through. And then one day I just put a coat and tie on and did in person. I walked in and asked to speak to some branch managers of brokerage firms in town, and my future boss at Legg Mason came out, and we chatted for a while, and we would go. I'd talk to him like once a week, and then finally after about 6 weeks, I'm like, hey, are you going to hire me or not, or I'm going somewhere else. So I started there, and my educational background was very helpful. I mean, I think I could have just about passed the Series 7 with very little study because I was into it, you know, and I had a degree in economics and an MBA, and I did option trades and things like that. So that's how I wound up at Legg Mason, and then they ultimately, how did I wind here? They ultimately got acquired by a large national firm. We did not like them. They were going to give me a large chunk of change if I would sign a non-compete for 4 years. I gave them mid six figures, gave them all their money back on the day of my independence. Happened to be the day of the Independence Bowl in Shreveport, December the 31st of 2005, and came in that morning, told my boss I was out of there, gave him the money back, and literally walked up here with my sales assistant and started this thing. And then you came a year later. So that's how we became Eagle Financial. And I would say, so that was really, I would say the thing that made it a challenging transition is when you're in the military, they had concerns. My boss had concerns that, you know, I would fail because I think something like 3 or 4 out of 5 people that enter this business fail anyway. But when you come from a military background, you know what you have to do every day because everything it's structured and it's laid out for you. And you've got to be a self-starter and think outside of the box and really, you know, bust your butt. And so, and it was unusual for me because I did not know anyone in Shreveport outside of the military. So I was talking to total strangers doing my marketing, and I had to market these people. And as I reflect back upon that, I actually think I prefer that. You know, I didn't want to go to family and friends and make them feel obligated. I wanted people to do business with me because they felt like I was competent and caring, whether they knew me or not. And that's how I did in-person cold calling, which makes you very uncomfortable at first, walking in on people and asking to talk to the influential one in the office, the business owner or whatever. But that's what I did and got my first, 100 or so clients doing that, and then cold calling in the evenings and probably working 60-hour weeks, including 5 or 6 hours on Saturdays. So there you go. How about you?
Yeah. Well, I got out. I knew I wanted to, do my 4 years, go back and finish my degree. And so when it was time, I was looking at, where I wanted to go back to college, and I made a decision to go to Baylor. One, I really wanted to go into business. I wanted to go to business school, and also wanted to be able to use my Russian training and get college credit for that. Thankfully, Baylor had a great business school and had a Russian language program, and it wasn't that far from home, so it just seemed like a good fit. I actually met with the dean of students at Baylor and said, "Here I am. This is what I have to offer you. Just give me a chance." And he did, and I was so excited to go and see him after my first semester, and I showed him my report card, and I said, "Here you go. I made straight A's. Thank you for that opportunity." And
Did you take any Russian classes?
I did continue and take some Russian, and I was doing the Army Reserves at the same time. And when I finished my degree, and I got an undergraduate degree, a bachelor degree in finance, I was recruited, on-campus recruiting, to go to work for Texas Commerce Bank, which at the time was a wholly owned subsidiary of Chemical Bank. And
I remember that.
yeah, Chemical Bank large New York City-based bank had purchased manufacturer's Hanover Bank, and then Chemical Bank bought Chase Manhattan. So Chemical was the predecessor to what is now Chase. So I was doing international banking for Texas Commerce Bank in Houston, and I did have an opportunity to use the Russian a little bit because Houston is the oil capital of the country, and there were Russian oil executives who were coming through town and gave me an opportunity to converse with them, and it was just interesting and fun. Let's see, what else? That's kind of how I transitioned and then eventually made my way back to Shreveport. How about this question, Jack? What are some things that you learned in the military that have served you well in the business world?
You know, I think, haven't given this much thought. It was being part of a flying unit in the military is something that I will always cherish because the camaraderie of that, there's nothing like it. I mean, you can say, you know, you hope to have that with a church fellowship or an office climate or, you know, whatever. That was something that was amazing. But, and really just, you know, I would say, I'll tell you this, Bill, one of the most important things when we were flying the aircraft was that we could all, you know, 6 different crew positions work together in harmony as one. Mm-hmm. And there was a 2-word phrase that we would use that was of paramount importance, and that is SA, Sierra Alpha, or situational awareness. So, and that's something that's kind of carried over. And then I would say with that too, attention to detail.
Yeah.
So I think of that. So like understanding situational awareness on the aircraft. If you're not paying attention to detail and you don't understand the situation, especially in a combat scenario, it can mean, or in a navigation scenario, flying the aircraft, you know, think about this. Flying 100 feet off the deck at nighttime at 3 a.m. and getting struck by lightning or having a bird strike, having people shooting at you, you know, just things like that. You have got to run, you know, very smoothly without fear. You fear nothing. And I mean, I think you really need to be in a position where you just do your job and don't care whether you live or die. You know, you're just calm as a cucumber and do your job. And so I think this situational awareness thing carries over to, you know, the marketplace. And really, when we're in the trenches every day, and you know, some of the things that help us to have situational awareness in what's going on here is by staying informed. Mm-hmm. You know, like I start off every morning reading the Wall Street Journal and, you know, looking at what's going on at the news around the world before I come into the office, understanding what's going on with the Federal Reserve and what all the different markets are doing, how do they compare to each other, and by historical standards, where are the opportunities. And then I even think, you know, I think of the Vietnam War veteran General Moore's 3 questions: what is happening, what is not happening, and what can we do about our current circumstances. So I think that you know, really there were some valuable lessons learned. I think also just the chain of command and just the way the military works like that, being respectful for authoritative figures in my life and the chain of command, even how we work now. I mean, I've had a boss for a year now, a little over a year, and didn't, for a while. So we've got to think compliance. I think there's a lot there because you have to follow, the rules of the flying business, and if you violate certain principles, it could mean, whether you're breathing or not.
Yeah.
And those are a few things.
No,
really.
those are all good. And, for me, I think one of the things that carried over, being in military intelligence, in the intelligence gathering and the intelligence analysis area, is just this curiosity.
Yeah.
Wanting to dig deeper and seek understanding, and I think that's a skill set,
High level understanding.
right,
Yeah.
that's very, very useful in what we do here, because the fact is we have to do a lot of data aggregation and data sorting and analysis. We get inundated with data, and so we have to be able to quickly and efficiently organize, sort, analyze, and act on the analysis that we're gleaning. You mentioned the camaraderie, and yeah, I've been really blessed in getting on Facebook just within the last couple of years and reuniting with old Army buddies, that I served with, and hadn't really even thought about in 30 years, and now I'm in a position where I can communicate with them. I've been able to see them, at these different reunions. That has been a real blessing, and I'm thankful for that. What are some other things? Well, I'd have to say, you mentioned attention to detail. That's very important. One of the things that's so critical, whether you're in the Air Force or you're a ground pounder, is taking care of your equipment. Your life depends on your equipment and maintaining that equipment, and that was something that was always ingrained in us. Now, do we have life-saving equipment in our office? No, but just that sense of responsibility and just taking care of things. As far as chain of command, well, our bosses are our clients.
Mhm.
And anyone who's willing to give up years of their life to serve their country, they have a commitment to serve, and that is the essence of what we do. We are serving our clients. Our clients, their needs come before our own, and that clearly is something that the military, Air Force, and Army prepared us for. So we take that very seriously. Our clients.
And I think of
Yeah.
things that can potentially go wrong. Like our fitness trainer told us last night that Netflix has just added the 2016 Benghazi film, and I think, just reflecting upon that, we were going to watch that last night, and I think we're saving it for tonight, babysitting our daughter's dog. But think of the things that went wrong there, okay? But I think the intel was probably a little bit complacent, the kind of stuff that you
Yep.
used to do. And I imagine how that has evolved to today. You could probably fly like a bumblebee-sized drone in there and get all kinds of stuff right inside houses and everything. Anyway, but then really there was a total breakdown of caring about those people and competence in the way it was handled once Intel discovered that something was going down. And that's something, watching a movie like that, or some of the failures of our U.S.
Right.
military, like Afghanistan, okay, that's an embarrassment to every veteran out there, and why some today might not want to serve. Things that happen, I can use the word Benghazi or Afghanistan, and I have a Marine pilot friend that'll just about vomit and just get very upset just saying those words, because we lost so many people. And I think of the linguist, not linguist, but yeah, linguist people that were trained to help us with intel over there. I'm looking for a term, and I'm at a loss, but a lot of those people were executed by the Taliban when we, left there. And I think there's some things that we can learn from these mistakes too, and this does carry over to having a disciplined framework or approach to how we think about investment
Right.
management for a client.
And having a willingness
Yeah.
to improve. And so
Yeah.
the after action review, okay, that's a
Yeah.
military term. And that's something that's very important in the military is, after the mission is over with, let's do the after action. What worked, what didn't work, how can we improve upon it? And
What do you do if something goes wrong?
Right.
So
that's something we have to do here because we are not infallible. We do make mistakes, and we do want to learn from our mistakes. Did you know? Here's a trivia. I know you like trivia. The single biggest loss of equipment during Operation Desert Storm. Do you know when that occurred?
I would guess at the end of that operation, we just left everything over there. Is that what happened?
Well, no, but not a bad guess. Actually, the single biggest loss of military hardware during Operation Desert Storm occurred outside of combat. And I was there. What happened was we had all of our
The
equipment.
warehouse blew up or something.
Well,
didn't it?
all of our equipment was loaded up,
Yeah.
fully armed, ready to go at moment's notice, and there was an electrical fire inside of one of the armored vehicles, which set off a chain reaction, and we had all kinds of heavy equipment blowing up. It was a horrible disaster, and there was a serious after action done after that.
I'm sure there was a general that got fired.
Well, General Schwarzkopf flew in, and our regimental commander was relieved of duty. It was not a proud day for the unit, but the point is that mistakes are made, and you learn from those mistakes, and that is something that we've carried over here. Well, we've been rambling. We just thought we would take the opportunity of today's show to shift gears and honor all of the veterans out there. It's a dying breed. It is literally a dying breed. I read that today veterans comprise about 6% of the U.S. population. That's it. And it was 20% back in 1980. So this dedication, this willingness to serve is on the decline. And I would hope that we would see that turn back around, hopefully. But,
Could be mandatory in the future if it doesn't change.
well, it could be, and you have to do what you have to do, but there is no substitute for an all-volunteer force.
And a strong military is the best deterrent you can
Absolutely,
ever have.
absolutely.
So I mean, we could very well be on a path where we're going to be challenged more and more in the future. And we're very fortunate that we don't have enemies on our own soil, even though intel specialists and the White House are articulating that there's a greater possibility of terrorist attacks inside of our borders than since 9/11, and we know why that is. So, and I think we've got a very divided nation about that. But you know, we've had our southern border open, and I think the politics of that is coming to an end, and it will once we have a terrorist attack.
Well,
So,
thank you for your service.
thank you, William.
Thank you, audience members, veterans. We applaud you. Happy Veterans Day.
Was that live?